Thank you. Good afternoon. I understand we're hearing from you, Ms. Lowe.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm reading D801's witness statement to the inquiry dated 26th of January 2022, and it's at BHM 000034. D801 is unable to give the oral evidence directly to the inquiry because he still struggles to recount the experiences of his time at Brookhouse. Each time he has been asked to do so, he has suffered repeated distressing thoughts and nightmares about his experience. Therefore, he has asked me to read his statement on his behalf. Introduction. I was detained at Brookhouse on 2 occasions. The first time was from 9th of April to 21st of May 2015, and then from 1st of March to 3rd of April 2017. From my perspective, I feel that my treatment in detention during both periods was terrible, and I was and continue to be badly affected by it. I cannot say that my treatment in detention during the second period was any worse than the first. Rather, I feel based on my direct experience, the problems were there all along. About me. I am a Tamil and from Sri Lanka. I am a torture survivor. I now have refugee status. I had to leave Sri Lanka because I was detained by security forces there and tortured. D801 came to the UK in January 2009 on a student visa. After his student visa expired, he made a claim for asylum, which was unsuccessful. My first detention at Brookhouse. I was detained for the first time by the Home Office in April 2015. I was taken into Brookhouse IRC. It was a really shocking experience and brought back all of the memories of what happened to me in Sri Lanka. Before being detained on this occasion, I had felt all right. What I mean is that I was trying to get on with my life. I was trying to avoid thinking about what happened to me, and for the most part, I managed to do that. But after going into detention, the sound of the doors closing, the sound of the keychains, the smell, the noises of people screaming about their detention and asking to be let out, all of this brought me right back to the worst memories of my detention in Sri Lanka. I was really scared during this period of detention. The Home Office had told me they wanted to remove me back to Sri Lanka. The thought of being sent back was terrifying. I experienced regular nightmares about people screaming. I couldn't sleep well. I had no appetite. I felt tired all the time. I felt hopeless, and I had frequent thoughts that life was not worth living anymore. D801 was released from Brookhouse in May 2015 after the Immigration Tribunal granted him bail. My situation post-release. I was really not well at all when I got out of Brookhouse the first time. During this time, I had 2 epileptic fits. I had not had these previously. I felt so desperate, so despairing, that I took an overdose in early August 2015. D801 was referred by his GP for an urgent mental health assessment. In the meantime, he continued to comply with the electronic tag and curfew and reported every week. My immigration solicitors at the time got me to see a consultant psychiatrist, Dr. Robin Lawrence. I met with him on the 31st of October 2015. At the time, I was in a really bad state. The following is an extract from Dr. Lawrence's report describing his examination of my mental state and his conclusions. This man was not able to look at me at all throughout the assessment. He was very distressed by any questions about his history. There was evidence of pseudo-hallucinations. He has signs of psychomotor retardation. It is clear that he is suffering from some form of psychosis. He was subjectively depressed and objectively blunted. He complained of nightmares and difficulty getting off to sleep and flashbacks. He also complained of being woken from sleep with a feeling that he is being attacked and suffocated. This man does have the symptoms of a major depressive disorder and of post-traumatic stress disorder. He has some form of psychotic disorder. D801 immigration solicitors submitted Dr. Lawrence's report in support of a fresh asylum claim, but that claim was rejected in July 2016. In September 2016, I was admitted to Newham University Hospital. The following is an extract from a letter sent to my GP by the Rapid Assessment Interface and Discharge Psychiatric Liaison Team at the hospital after this admission. Quote, D801 was referred to the RAID team after he had earlier presented to the emergency department via the police. He was found in East Ham by police, hanging onto some railings near the side of the road. He was confused, disorientated, and did not know where he was and how he came to be there. He is having ongoing suicidal thoughts as a result of the uncertainty of his asylum application, which is exacerbated by his symptoms of PTSD. it would appear that he entered a dissociated state and ended up in Newham. My immigration solicitors at the time wrote to the Home Office to ask them to stop requiring me to report because I was really unwell. In December 2016, the Home Office notified me that they wanted to remove me. My immigration solicitors made more representations to explain that I was mentally in such a poor state that seeking my removal would increase the risks of my repeating suicide attempts. In January 2017, I made another attempt at suicide, overdosing on antidepressants. The following paragraphs are summarized as follows. D801 was seen again by Dr. Lawrence after this suicide attempt. Dr. Lawrence expressed concerns about his mental health. He concluded that D801 had developed a psychotic depression as a consequence of his PTSD, which had been re-triggered by his period of detention at Brookhouse. My second detention at Brookhouse. Immigration enforcement dawn raid. I was asleep at the time. A large number of immigration officers came to my friend's house to detain me. It was early morning, I think around 6 a.m. It was a shock. The immigration officers accused me of having missed a reporting appointment with the Home Office. I tried to explain that the appointment had been rescheduled for the following month. They accused me of lying. They also said that because I was wearing a tag, I must have done something really bad. I was taken away. I told immigration officers that I was on antidepressants and showed them medical appointment letters, HOM 028540, concerning my mental health. I couldn't believe that I was being taken back to Brookhouse. It felt unreal. The Home Office decision to detain. Paragraphs 34 to 36 of his witness statement is summarized as follows. The Home Office caseworker's submission to the detention gatekeeper described D801 as an absconder and said there were no compassionate circumstances to render detention unsuitable. The submissions made no mention of the evidence of mental ill health or Dr. Lawrence's report. Deterioration in my mental health and continued detention. The following section is an extract from the particulars of claim submitted in D801's damages claim against the Home Office, which D801 had previously approved. Quote, an admission health screening, HOM 032191, carried out on his arrival noted that D801 suffered PTSD as a result of being a victim of torture, that he experienced flashbacks at night in the dark, and that he had overdosed twice on medication since his release from the previous period of immigration detention. The IRC Healthcare Unit opened an ACDT, HOM 032192, with hourly observations. This arrangement was informed to the Home Office by way of an IS-91RA Part C. No Rule 34 examination was carried out in accordance with the requirements of the Detention Centre Rules 2001 within 24 hours of his being detained at Brookhouse. No Rule 35.3 assessment as to D801's disclosure of the torture was carried out either. On the 2nd of March, D801 was seen by a mental health nurse who notes that he presented as anxious and vulnerable, HOM 032191. Later that day, Dr. Belder, a psychiatrist, saw D801. Dr. Belder recommended that D801 be transferred to the hospital under Section 48 of the Mental Health Act for treatment, HOM 032192_0003. No steps were taken to arrange a Rule 35.1 or a Rule 35.3 report to be completed by a medical practitioner in view of the concerns raised at that meeting. On 3rd of March 2017, Dr. Chowdhury, a GP, completed the second required report under Section 48 of the same Act, HOM 032192. Pending the application for a Section 48 hospital transfer, D801 was moved to the E-wing of Brookhouse. On the 2nd of March 2017, D801 solicitors wrote to the Home Office asking for his release on the basis of his severe mental health, his suicidal ideation, and the unsuitability of detention. On the 6th of March, D801 was seen by another mental health nurse who also noted his anxious presentation. No steps were taken to refer D801 to medical practitioner for a Rule 35.1 or Rule 35.3 report. On the 7th of March, D801 was seen by two nurses from Langley Green Hospital who decided that he was unsuitable for inpatient admission at that unit. On the same day, the Home Office reviewed D801's detention and decided to maintain it, HOM 029012. The Home Office noted D801 was adult at risk level 2 and had an open ACDT due to self-harm risks. but said there were no exceptional circumstances or risk indicators to render him unsuitable for detention. No reference was made to Dr. Lawrence's reports or to the concerns recorded by IRC Healthcare about his severe mental ill health. No consideration was paid to the impact of detention to him. On 9th of March, Dr. Belder reviewed D801's mental health. He presented as upset, anxious, desperate, and resorting to self-harm by scratching his arm. Dr. Belder recommended sessions with the mental health nurse and added an antipsychotic to his medication to help him sleep. On the 10th of March, an ACDT review noted cuts on D801's hands. He told a nurse he had suicidal thoughts and self-harm. On 11th of March 2017, plastic cutlery had to be removed from D801's room to reduce risks of self-harm. On the 13th of March, the healthcare unit informed the Home Office that they remained of the view that D801 was an adult at risk level 3. But on 15th of March, the Home Office maintained D801's detention and treated him as an adult at risk level 2, and said there were no risk indicators that he was unsuitable for detention, ignoring the concerns from the IRC healthcare unit and Dr. Lawrence's reports. On 16th of March, D801's immigration solicitors asked the Home Office to release him. They provided a report from Dr. Eona Steen of Medical Justice, which described D801 as acutely psychotic and requiring a level of care which was normally provided inpatient or in the community, not in a detention centre, which was not suitable or safe. The Home Office refused the request to release him. On the 17th of March, Dr. Belder said in a psychiatric review, HOM 032197_0007, that detention was a less ideal place for D801, as he required intensive trauma therapy, which was not available in detention. On 19th of March, D801 made a failed suicide attempt, HOM 032191_0008. He was found by Brookhouse staff to have used a shoelace as a ligature around his neck. A plastic knife was also found. D801 was placed on constant watch under the ACDT. This was informed to the Home Office by way of an IS-91RA Part C. On the 23rd of March, after a psychiatric review, HOM 032191_0009, Dr. Belder concluded D801 required eye movement desensitization reprocessing treatment, plus trauma therapy, which could not be applied at Brookhouse. On the 29th of March, the Home Office maintained detention, further to a review, HOM 024825, again, without any consideration of all the medical evidence available to it. On the 31st of March, Dr. Belder again said D801 should be released on health grounds because he required trauma therapy that could not be provided in the IRC. The Home Office decided that day that D801's detention could no longer be justified. On the 3rd of April 2017, a Rule 35-1 was completed by Dr. Chowdhury, a GP, HOM 028619. This again confirmed a diagnosis of PTSD and stated that detention resulting in, quote, continued deterioration in mental health without appropriate management, end quote. Dr. Chowdhury stated that the resources at Brookhouse were exhausted and the psychiatrist was unable to offer any further help. The risks to D801's health was likely to become serious within, quote, possibly weeks, unquote. A CID record of the same day noted that D801 was now treated as a level 3 adult at risk with mental health difficulties and severe PTSD. D801 was released that same day with monthly reporting conditions. Removal from association. I may have been held on B wing for the first night of this detention, and my medical records show that a request was made by a doctor for me to be moved to the E wing on the 2nd of March. I don't remember being told anything about this decision at the time. I stayed there for the remainder of my detention. I was not aware of anything called Rule 40. I was not aware at the time that there were processes that should be followed when you are removed from association. I was never told I was being removed from association. ACDT. During my second detention at Brookhouse, I was placed on something called ACDT. My ACDT observation levels were changed on the 10th of March from every 3 hours to every 2 hours and hourly at night. After I reported ongoing thoughts of suicide and self-harm and, quote, several superficial cuts, end quote, were seen on my hands, which I declined to speak about, HOM 0321 Brook_0006. Cutlery was also removed from my room on the 11th of March. I remember the officers coming to check on me a lot. They would knock on the door and ask if I was okay, and I would say, yes, I'm fine. They did not ask me any follow-up questions or have conversations with me. I remember feeling irritated by the fact that they kept coming to ask if I was okay. For some of the time whilst I was at Brookhouse, I could not even bring myself to eat. And there would be officers coming and telling me to go and eat. I would tell them to leave me alone. While looking back, I can see these officers may have been trying to help. At the time, they felt like the biggest threat to me. I was not aware of the difference between G4S and the Home Office. I did not see them as different parties. Every time I saw detention officers, people from the Home Office, or any type of government officials, I saw them like the Sri Lankan authorities. I felt threatened. I felt they were not my friends, and I should just stay away from them. So that's what I tried to do as much as possible. I felt I would be in danger if I left the cell I was in, so I would not even get out of bed to go to get food. Sometimes officers would bring me a meal. Other times I just went without food until eventually I physically had to eat. I went without a shower for around a week at one point. For me, going without food at Brookhouse was not a protest. I didn't feel there would have been any point in protesting, as I felt nobody at Brookhouse had listened to a single word I said since the moment I was picked up by the immigration officers on the 1st of March 2017. The IRC staff were not helpful. Whatever I said to them, they would say I was lying. I did not feel I was taken seriously when I spoke to them. An extract of the report of Dr. Sen, a psychiatrist, records D801's description of his experience of the second detention as follows. He could not eat and was throwing up all the time. He just stayed inside his room and did not want to socialize with anybody. The food tasted to him as if he was eating a pair of glasses, like it was burning. The whole experience felt to him like walking on fire. Every single day felt as if it was biting on his skin, and he physically felt the pain. Luckily, he was given some tablets which helped for a while and helped to distract him. Some days he didn't get his medication. He started shaking his head at this point of the interview, saying, no way, I would rather die. At night when he was locked up, he banged on the door asking for help, but he was ignored. At one point he decided to kill himself. He couldn't find anything with which to kill himself. He was eventually given some medication, as at one stage he thought they had cancelled medication, and he thought he would just be left there. Rule 35. Despite the Home Office having lots of information about my poor mental health and the risk that I might hurt myself, no Rule 35 was completed in my case until the 3rd of April 2017, the day I was released. I am told by my solicitors that the detention centre did report concerns about me on what are called IS-91RA Part C forms, but these weren't taken into account when reviewing my detention. I don't know what a Part C form is, and I don't remember being given a copy of it or being told that it was sent. It doesn't seem to me that the Home Office took notice of this at all, because they continued to detain me at Brookhouse even though it was making my illness worse. Impact of detention. For a long time after the second detention at Brookhouse, I struggled. Some nights I would feel like everything is now okay. Other nights I would be all over the place. I tried my best to keep going because at least I was not being locked up. At the beginning, little things would trigger bad memories about detention. For example, I went to Croydon Home Office to report and some police officers came my way. Next thing I knew, I was in hospital. I couldn't even remember what happened. This happened to me again a few days before I saw Dr. Sen for the first report. I am still scared when I see police officers. I don't trust that they won't come and get me again. That experience of my second detention, of being taken away early in the morning, is something I never want to repeat. In a further report completed in March 2021, Dr. Sen concluded that D801 continued to suffer from PTSD, linked to his traumatic experience in Sri Lanka. His immigration detention acted as a re-traumatization experience. My wishes about involvement in the Brookhouse inquiry. The inquiry already knows that I had brought a claim for compensation from the Home Office for the 2 periods that I was detained at Brookhouse. The Home Office didn't file any court document to explain why they did what they did to me. They didn't defend their actions and agree to pay me compensation in a confidential settlement. But they did that without apologizing or accepting that they did anything wrong. I don't even know if they even raised this with anybody responsible for the decisions about me, and if anybody knew about how harmful this was for me. When I found out about the Brookhouse inquiry and what its purpose is, I wanted to help the inquiry to understand my experience and why the way I was treated made me feel like not a human being, and the environment of detention was a constant reminder of what happened to me in Sri Lanka, making me feel so ill. I feel safer now, and I have refugee status, but still, being asked to go back to my past, including my detention at Brookhouse, is dark for me. To me, it was a prison. It was frightening and intimidating. I did not feel safe, and I do not think it was the right place for someone with my mental health problems. They just locked me away, and I was in the room alone for many hours, where I had no escape from my bad thoughts and memories and was in constant fear of being sent back to torture in Sri Lanka. D801 has provided a signature for a statement of truth in respect of this statement.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong, I believe we're hearing on behalf of your client D687.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you.
D687 has just entered.
Thank you.
Thanks. Chair, D687's witness statement to the inquiry is dated 16th of February 2022 and is at DPG 000021. Reading first paragraph 2 of that witness statement, I am from the city of Hargeisa in what is now known as the Republic of Somaliland. I am a Christian and I speak fluent English, which is my first language, as well as some Somali. I am now almost 38 years old and have lived in the UK continuously since 1994, when I arrived with my family as a 10-year-old. Summarising paragraphs 3 to 4, he then summarises his current mental health diagnosis given by Dr. Newan Galapathy, which is recurrent depressive disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder, and perhaps also a psychotic illness such as bipolar affective disorder. D687 then explains that this has made it difficult for him to prepare his statement and to answer all the inquiry's questions, but his solicitors have helped him particularly with dates by referring to documents and his previous accounts. And now reading paragraphs 5 to 6. I was detained under immigration powers from 20th of March 2015 until the 30th of March 2017, a total of 987 days, or just over 2 years and 8 months. I spent most of this period at Brookhouse, IRC, where I was detained from 29th of October 2015 until the 13th of May 2017, a total of 563 days, or just over 1 year and 6 months. On 13th of May 2017, I was moved to IRC The Verne in Dorset, where I remained detained until the 30th of November 2017, when I was finally released after the Immigration Tribunal granted me bail. I have set out my background below because it's relevant to my experiences at Brookhouse. It's been difficult to do this, and it has brought back a lot of bad memories which I tried to forget, but which I think it is important for the inquiry to understand. My time at Brookhouse wasn't bad just because of the mistreatment and abuse I experienced there, but because it forced me to remember and relive all the traumatic events and abuse I have experienced throughout my life. It is this combination which ultimately made me feel helpless and to give up on life at Brookhouse. Summarising paragraphs 7 to 18, he then summarises his early life, fleeing at about 6 years old, what he saw there, and he describes serious sexual abuse as a child at gunpoint in a refugee camp. He says this abuse has haunted me my whole life. As I have gotten older, the feeling of shame has stayed with me. As a result, I didn't feel able to talk about it, and didn't, for most of my life. He moves on to his arrival in the UK aged 10, and he and his family being granted refugee status. He explains that his family were later granted British citizenship, but he was not because he had been taken into care at that time, following physical abuse by his brother. Social services didn't make a citizenship application for him, and he didn't realise the significance of this until later, about how that... He talks about how that feels to him, being let down by social services, a loss of identity, because he's always seen himself as British because he grew up here, and that it hurts him when it is said that he is not. D687 also talks here about learning of the death of his father. He then moves on to describing being a teenager, now in foster care, the difficulties he experienced there, including at the hands of his foster carer, whom he tried to report. He talks about his early criminal offending and doing it, he thinks, in order to look brave to friends. He was with the wrong crowd. D687 then moved back to live with some extended family in his late teens when things were less disruptive. He managed to get 6 GCSEs and went on to college. He was thought by teachers to have ADHD and dyslexia. Then, summarising paragraphs 19 to 24, D687 summarises his early adult life, including his struggles with his mental ill health, further offending, an attempt to hang himself whilst in prison, and becoming the subject of deportation action by the Home Office. He couldn't understand how he could be deported as he thought he was British, but now realises it was because he never obtained a British passport. He describes his attempts to resist deportation and entering immigration detention for the first time in March 2012, and that was his first period of immigration detention, and it lasted 8 months. D687 then talks about another attempted suicide in July 2013 when passers-by stopped him jumping off a road bridge in Harrow. That saved his life, but he returned to offending before there was what he describes as a pivotal moment when he sought to break the cycle of his life. He contacted police, admitting the offence for which he was then being held, but also all his previous offences going back to 2005. D687 quotes the judge's sentencing remarks, which in turn refer to a detective being impressed by D687 and the detective's belief that this marked a genuine turning point for him. Summarising paragraphs 25 to 37, D687 then describes how what in fact happened next was that the Home Office used the list of offences, which he'd now admitted, to re-detain him at the end of his prison sentence and attempt removal once more. D687 therefore entered immigration detention again on 20th of March 2015, where he remained up to and a little beyond the period with which the inquiry is concerned. D687 describes his further immigration claims and appeals before turning to his arrival at Brookhouse in the early hours of 29th of October 2015. D687 then describes his induction at Brookhouse, Home Office documents which existed at that time and which refer to his suicide risk. He talks about not having had a Rule 34 assessment but asking for antidepressants when he saw the doctor a month later, and he answers an inquiry question saying he doesn't remember attending an induction tour. He says he was on C Wing for most of his time in Brookhouse, save when they were adding beds when he moved to A Wing. D687 talks about the physical environment, comparing to Dover IRC, where he had been before, and saying Brookhouse was more like a prison. He talks about the noise, describes the cells, their size, smell, broken ventilation, and lack of privacy. He and his cellmate agreed only to use the in-cell toilet during association periods so the other one could leave. And at paragraph 38, he says this: I found Brookhouse worse than prison. At least in prison there was a structure, classes to improve yourself and prepare you for re-entering society, activities, and most importantly, you knew when you were going to be released. You could use that as a target to motivate yourself to improve by then. But in Brookhouse, no one knew if they would be there for a few weeks, months, or longer. People missed their loved ones and didn't know when they would be able to see them again on the outside. There was so much uncertainty, and this increased the tension. Everyone was on edge, meaning even little things could push someone to snap. This meant there were more conflicts and arguments. Even passive people became more aggressive in Brookhouse. This didn't mean you weren't scared, but if you didn't appear tough, there was a risk you would be targeted for being perceived as weak or vulnerable by other detained people and by officers. For example, if staff mugged you over and you were polite about it, they'd keep mugging you over. The longer I was detained in this toxic environment, the more aggressive and disruptive I became. Summarising paragraphs 39 to 51, D687 talks about his attempts to get legal advice and to get released. He refers to detention reviews in early 2016, which suggests his removal was not imminent, but he was still not released. D687 then talks about how his frustration grew from mid-2016. He started to lose hope and he started to use spice. This was how he came to meet Anton Bohl. D687 then talks about being involved in protests about halal food and detention conditions. He says he suffered reprisals from officers for that. He was briefly on E-Wing because of another protest. Summarising paragraphs 52 to 56, D687 then talks about his previous statements, including in the Judicial Review, and about his interview with the Professional Standards Unit of the Home Office. He talks about the problems he had with that, being off his medication, and references the officers that the PSU had been able to identify. I'm then reading paragraphs 58 to 66. I had very bad experiences at Brookhouse. Everyone is supposed to be treated fairly with dignity and respect, no matter where you're from, what religion or ethnic background you have. We're all humans, but at Brookhouse I wasn't treated like that. We were treated like animals, less than human. No one deserves that. Officers assumed we were all criminals, and that meant we deserved everything that happened to us. But most people at Brookhouse hadn't committed any crimes. Even for those who had, like me, we'd already served our time. Irrespective of someone's past, everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, like any human should be. Staff just didn't care about us, and that was obvious. Everything was a box-ticking exercise for them. Everything was a yes or no answer. They never asked the right questions like, how are you, D687, or how are you feeling? On an almost daily basis, I was verbally abused by detention officers who made racist comments such as, get out the fucking country. They would boss us around just to feel powerful. A lot of the officers would also be sarcastic and take the mick out of me. They knew I couldn't do anything about it. They were provoking me to try and get a reaction. If I did react, they would laugh at me. It was humiliating, but it was also common that it became normalised. I knew that some of my records describe incidents where I would become verbally abusive to officers. What they never describe is why I would react like that. Officers obviously aren't going to write that they abuse detained people to provoke them, but that's what was happening. They'd provoke me to get a reaction, then punish me for reacting. The longer I was detained, the more all of this wore me down. It was so bad that I got to the stage that I decided I didn't want to go on living. I gave up. Many officers were regularly abusive to me and to other detained people. I don't remember the officers' names, but I could recognise them from photos. Not all officers at Brookhouse were abusive, but most of the ones I interacted with were. If they were having a bad day, like if something had happened in their personal life, they would be worse. I was treated like an outsider at Brookhouse. I didn't understand it. My family all pay into the system. My brother works for the NHS. My sister's a teacher. I'm British, but I was treated like I wasn't, and like that justified abusing me. The abuse and mental torture that I experienced from G4S and Home Office staff was so bad, I didn't feel like I was living in a democratic society. Happen in a democracy. In preparing this statement, I have tried to remember individual incidents of abuse or mistreatment by specific staff. However, I found that difficult for a combination of reasons. The abuse that I experienced at Brookhouse was so frequent and so woven into the culture of the centre it became completely normal. I think that is an issue itself, but as it occurred, I downplayed the significance of many incidents in my head. If I hadn't done that at the time, I would have found being detained at Brookhouse even more unbearable. However, the consequence is that my memory of specific dates, locations, and people is affected. I found the whole experience of being detained at Brookhouse to be traumatic. It broke me, and my mental health has never recovered. As I explained in my PSU interview, the reference that is there, Chair, I sought to forget a lot of what happened to me as a coping mechanism. When I do think about it, it makes me very emotional. Just happened and often leads to a deterioration in my mental health.
Yeah, I think we've lost the microphone, I'm afraid, Mr. Armstrong. If we just pause for 1 moment and see if we can sort that out. Thank you.
Does that work? Yes, that's better.
Thank you.
I can't quite remember where I'd got to. Coping mechanism, I think. When I do think about it, it makes me very emotional and often leads to a deterioration in my mental health. That is partly because I am still living in the same state of limbo as I was when I first left Brookhouse, so I remain vulnerable to the Home Office's motives. Dr. Galapathy described this about me in his recent report, and the reference is there, Chair. Paragraph 201, he has also become avoidant and does not like talking about the events that he reports and dislikes being reminded about his past traumatic experiences. He continues to have strong and distressing emotions related to the trauma that he reports, which he has not been able to resolve. The events I've been asked to recall occurred over the course of 18 months at Brookhouse, which itself formed only a portion of a longer continuous period of 32 months in immigration detention. As a result, events have started to merge in my memory. These instances of abuse also occur between 5 and 7 years ago. Since then, my experiences have been repeatedly denied by G4S and the Home Office, even though they are now being confirmed in the inquiry's disclosure. Also, the delay since the events and effects of being constantly doubted and disbelieved have affected my ability to recall specific details with confidence and accuracy. The Panorama documentary showed officers and healthcare staff falsifying records, not recording incidents of abuse, and lying about them. My solicitors tell me that much of the inquiry's disclosure shows this to have been a theme at Brookhouse. The lack of documents so I can refer to incidents or even their possible dates and people involved adds to the difficulties I've explained above. Given the above, I think it's understandable that I can't be more specific than I have been, but also I've not been shown photos of all the officers at Brookhouse. I have repeatedly said since 2018 that I think this would prompt my memory. My solicitors have tried to help me identify individuals while preparing this statement, and this has helped me remember some individuals, and as a consequence, some of the incidents involving them. Verbal and racist abuse. I remember staff would swear a lot at me and other detained people, even though they are only words. Over time they started to wear me down, especially when it combines with everything else, like the conditions at Brookhouse, the uncertainty around my immigration situation, and length of detention. I found abusive comments about my British identity especially difficult to hear. I remember an officer saying things like, "You've come to this country and been given opportunities, but you're taking the piss out of it. Fuck off back to your own country. Go back to fucking Somalia. You're not from this country. You're not one of us." I found this humiliating. I felt and feel as British as them, but they're telling me I'm not. Where do I belong then? It made me feel worthless, like I wasn't a human being. Summarising paragraph 67 to 71, D667 explains that most of the abuse occurred whilst he was on C wing, but he deals with a PSU point describing how officers would move between wings, particularly during refurbishment. He says the abuse was not confined to a small group of officers. He says the abuse happened all the time, but the risks were too great if you spoke up. However, he says that he got more angry as time went on. He speaks again about aggressive language, swearing, and about othering. At paragraph 72, he says this: "Another example would be how staff tried to refer to us as some sort of other group. When going for lunch, some officers would make comments like, 'Oh, you've come back for lunch. Migrants, fucking hell, you lot never get hungry.' These sort of comments occurred as part of your daily routine, which would make it feel normal." Summarising paragraphs 73 to 82, in these paragraphs D687 describes interactions with various members of staff. He describes being sworn at by DCM Steve Webb and abuse from an officer who seems to be DCO Marina Mansi. D687 then talks about DCO Babtunde Fagbo, and he says this at paragraph 83. "I remember DCO Fagbo as he sometimes worked on my wing, but also on other wings which I would sometimes go through. He also came and got you for Home Office appointments to receive your monthly progress reports. He was particularly abusive and racist to me. He was a bully. He was regularly sarcastic and insulting to me, like he was trying to provoke me for a reaction. Sometimes he would do this by making stupid comments or asking things about my immigration circumstances, which he knew I wouldn't know, and sometimes he was just outright racist. Some of the comments I remember him saying are, 'Why are you still here? Your own country is better than being in detention. Maybe you should go back to your own country rather than staying here. This country doesn't want you, and why are you begging to be here?' Throughout he was saying I wasn't British. He was being sarcastic, and if I reacted he would laugh and then go and tell other officers. There were occasions I saw him laugh in the face of detained people who couldn't speak English. He would say to other officers things like, 'He can't even speak English, how did he get in the country?' Even if this wasn't in the face of the specific detained person, other detained people would hear it. That sort of thing grates you." Summarising paragraphs 84 to 87, D687 then describes his interaction with DCO Luke Instone Brewer, who he knew as Ginge but has been able to identify. He describes him as a racist, abusive bully, and also says he was involved in supplying drugs to Brookhouse. He says he was totally corrupt. Reading paragraphs 88 to 89, "As for his involvement in supplying drugs, I know this because another detained person who I knew was dealing drugs within Brookhouse told me. I don't remember the detained person's name, but he was a black man in his 40s or 50s. I remember chatting with him in the D-Wing courtyard, which is next to the library, and asking how he was bringing the drugs in. He told me he had an officer doing that bit for him. When I asked which officer, he pointed out Ginge and said he was selling it to him. As I have said, I now know Ginge is called DCO Instone Brewer. My cellmate, D343, was also selling drugs in Brookhouse and separately told me that Ginge was bringing it in. D343 was friends with the detained person I mentioned above, who he was also getting his drugs from. So DCO Instone Brewer would give that detained person drugs, he'd sell it on to my cellmate, who would then sell it on to other detained people. D343 had a different view of DCO Instone Brewer and got along well with him, like they were cool with each other. He explained to me that it wasn't just drugs. Ginge could bring in anything for £500 if it was certain size and weight. These were called a parcel. It could be drugs, a weapon, or other sort of contraband. Basically, you'd contact someone on the outside to arrange for a parcel to be made up for you. You could get them to wrap it in a certain way, so you would know if it had been opened or tampered with. You would then get someone on the outside to transfer Ginge the money into a bank account. Once he had that, you would give him pickup instructions. Ginge would then collect the parcel and bring it in to work with him to give to whoever ordered it. I don't know if DCO Instone Brewer ever looked in the parcels, but he knew what he was doing. You don't collect parcel from a drug dealer and think it's something else other than drugs. Summarising paragraphs 90 to 105, D687 then refers to other evidence about DCOs Instone Brewer and Fagbo, which the inquiry has received, and says that also reflects his experience. He talks about his pillow being removed, about bullying through control of the IT suite, and incidents relating to that. D687 then talks about other officers, Nathan Ring, Ben Shadbolt, Steve Dix, Graham Purnell, Andrew Lydon, Hafiz Akhtar, and DCO Derek Murphy. Summarising paragraphs 106 to 108 as follows. D687 talks more about drugs. He says it was widespread that officers would turn a blind eye, that others were supplying it. He talks about the effect of taking it and why he did, and he talks about the link between it and his mental health. He refers to being told by one officer, if you don't want to live, then kill yourself on spice. The less foreign nationals in here, the better. Reading paragraphs 109 to 111, I remember making a massive joint with about a gram of spice in it. I think I was on A-wing at the time. I showed it to my cellmate D343 and told him I'd had enough and that if I do die from smoking it, not to call anyone, so they couldn't bring me back. I told him how I wanted to die in this country, rather than being removed to some other place I didn't know and dying there. I wanted to be buried beside my brother. I even wrote a suicide note to my mum so he could give it to the officers, but D343 took it off me and ripped it up. I didn't die that night, but that's the point which I had gotten to. At the time, I got most of my drugs from D343 because he was my cellmate and was selling drugs in Brookhouse from our cell. D343 wasn't a drug dealer when he arrived at Brookhouse, but as his mental health deteriorated and he started to use spice, someone suggested to him he could also sell it, and so he did. He would be speaking on the phone on loudspeaker in our cell, arranging his sales. He would then bag up the drugs in our cell and slip it under other cell doors. D343 explained to me the process of getting drugs into Brookhouse. There were two main ways. The first was through packages in the post, the second was through officers who would smuggle it into the centre and sell it to you, to then sell on to other detained people. It sometimes made D343 a bit of a target. I remember one time when about 8 other detained people ran into our cell and beat him up. They even smashed a kettle around his head. The officers all knew what had happened, but no one came to see him. D343 had a black eye, so it was noticeable, but I don't think he went to healthcare about this. I remember D343 telling me that he was making about £100 per day, but this could go up to around £300 to £400 on a good day, whereas he said some of the officers were making more like £900 per day. DCO Instone Brewer wasn't the only officer supplying drugs like this. I knew there was an officer on D and E wings too, but I didn't know who they were. I think once officers heard how much money they could make from it, more of them wanted to get involved. In D343's case, he explained how people would put money in a bank account he had on the outside. He was selling spice for £25 per half gram, so most orders would be £50. If someone wanted to buy drugs, they'd pay, for example, £50 and 2 pence. When they came to D343, they would quote how much they'd paid, and D343 knew that that corresponded to an order and payment he'd received. The random number of pennies was meant to be a bit of added security. Summarise paragraphs 112 to 128, D687 then talks about an incident which resulted in him being put on Rule 40, which he says was a mistake by officers but had a significant impact on him. He talks about the complaint system, which he had absolutely no faith in, and a number of complaints that he tried. One of those, he said, resulted in him finding out that he'd been wrongly categorised as a sex offender and refused access to the cultural kitchen on that basis. D687 talks about what happened as a result of that, including a serious assault on him. He explains that it appears that G4S officers must have misunderstood something in his file and then circulated it. D687 also explains how this formed part of his later complaint to the Home Office PSU, but they also misunderstood, calling him a liar. But D687 understands it's now accepted that he was right about all this. Summarising paragraphs 129 to 133, D687 sets out his experience and view of healthcare. He says, "They only deal with the likes of ticking boxes. They didn't care how people actually felt. It seemed like everyone was just covering their own back by filling in a form so they could say they had seen someone. But in reality, they would just see you then call, 'That's it, you go along next.' One thing I remember very clearly was no matter what was wrong with someone, the answer was always to give them 2 paracetamol. It was ridiculous." He then talks about his mental health and how it started when he was taken into care but worsened in prison and worsened again in immigration detention. He talks about developing anxiety and panic attacks and not sleeping. He then talks about self-harming. Reading paragraphs 134 to 135, "I began to self-harm whilst in Brookhouse. I'd use razor blades to cut myself in my room. I would cut my wrists and arms, but also in between my toes. I would tell my cellmate, D343, when I did this, or he would see me doing it. I would never tell healthcare when I did this, and I would even hide my scars. As I've said, healthcare were just about ticking boxes. I had seen how they treated myself and others. I didn't trust them to provide me with any real care, and I wasn't interested in getting paracetamol. If they could have helped me, they would have already. I had never told my solicitors or doctors about my self-harming with razor blades before we began preparing this statement for the inquiry. I didn't even tell Dr. Galapathy when he assessed me last year when preparing a report for the inquiry. I felt too embarrassed about it and ashamed to talk about it, like it showed I was weak. I also just didn't think anyone would get it. Why would someone feel better after cutting themselves? I knew it wouldn't make sense, so I told myself it was just a small detail which they didn't need to know because they already knew I'd tried to hang myself at Brookhouse as shown in Panorama. The only reason I told them about it this time was because the video footage of me on 25th of April 2017, and the reference is there, Chair, has me showing officers the scars and cuts on my arm at 09:11. They asked me what I was showing the officers, which led to me telling them about this. Summarising paragraphs 136 to 139, D687 then talks more about his mental health, talks about not having had depressants when he was at Brookhouse. He sets out Dr. Galapathy's view that this was a clear failure in his care. D687 then talks about him having refused food and fluids. Reading paragraphs 140 to 142, whilst detained, I also lost my nan and brother. My nan died September 2015, about a month before I moved to Brookhouse. However, when my brother died, this had a massive impact on me. My brother died of throat cancer in December 2016. He'd been ill for a long time, and I felt guilty about not being able to see him whilst in immigration detention. When he died, I lost that opportunity forever. Out of all my family members, he helped me the most. He would send me money to top up my phone and stay in contact with me regularly. When I lost him, I also lost all that support he provided me. What made my brother's death worse was how the Home Office treated me. I applied on 20th of December 2016 to be released temporarily so that I could pay my respects to my brother. Although he died in December, his body was held by the coroner for quite a while. As a result, his funeral wasn't until January or February 2017. The Home Office responded to my request saying I needed to prove my brother was dead. It was like they were taking the mick out of me. How was I able to prove my brother was dead when I was detained? I thought the Home Office could check this as they're part of the government, but I also asked my mother to provide evidence of my brother's death. When I asked my mother for that, she thought I wasn't being serious and that I was insulting my brother. She hung up on me so I couldn't provide any evidence. As a result, I never got to attend my brother's funeral or pay my respects to him. I was really upset by this. It was hugely distressing. It contributed to my worsening mental health at the beginning of 2017 and was one of the reasons why I started to think more proactively about ending my life at the start of 2017. I remember going to healthcare around this time and asking for antidepressants. I queued up in the line for collecting medication and asked the nurse when she got to me. She just dismissed my request. In January 17, I had a bail hearing. My mother, who had said I could live with her if released, didn't show up to the hearing. That was because she was too unwell to attend. She was depressed as a result of my brother's recent death. My family had attended so many bail hearings before me, each time for no reason as I was refused bail. On this occasion, bail was refused because my mother didn't show up to confirm her offer of residence. Summarising paragraphs 143 to 152, D687 talks about how in February 2017 he was in contact with GDWG and a reference that they made. There was then a mental health appointment, and in March 2017, D687 talked for the first time about some of the abuse in his past. There was then an account of events leading through to April 2017, starting with some bad news from the Home Office, some self-harming, and seeing a nurse who didn't raise concerns or open an ACDT. On the 15th of April 2017, he saw Dr. Uzerali, who completed a Rule 35.3 report. D687 sets out what that said. Reading paragraph 153, the report doesn't accurately reflect what I told Dr. Uzerali on 15th of April 2017. My appointment lasted 20 to 30 minutes. I showed up wearing my T-shirt, so the fresh scars on my arms from 2 days earlier were visible. I also showed him these and said I would self-harm again, but he didn't care. I remember he said I was only self-harming because I was in detention. He said he'd seen it so many times. It was like because he saw it a lot with other people, he didn't believe me or take me seriously. He asked me how I felt, but nothing more specific. It seemed like he already knew what he was going to write. At this stage, I briefly mentioned to him about my childhood sexual abuse, but I didn't go into much detail, definitely not as much detail as I did when I spoke to the nurse on 7th of March 2017. I assumed because they were all part of the same department, they would all have access to my record, so he would have known what I'd already said, meaning I didn't need to say it again, which I didn't want to do. That was because every time I talk about my experiences, it brought them all rushing back to me. It was really difficult and re-traumatizing. I didn't want to keep doing that if it wasn't going to change anything. Given nothing changed after telling the nurse, I thought it would be the same this time. I was right. He didn't ask me if I was suicidal or like self-harming. He didn't ask me if being detained was making my health deteriorate. It was, clearly. I was normal when I arrived at Brookhouse, but was now cutting myself and wanted my life to end. It had broken me, and I was now going crazy. As the appointment went on, I couldn't wait for it to end. I remember leaving it feeling worse than when I went in. I also felt a strong sense of regret, like I shouldn't have said anything because it made me feel rubbish and was never going to change anything. I was naive to think otherwise. Summarising paragraphs 154 to 158, D687 then sets out what happened after the Rule 35.3 report. He also refers to what Dr. Hard, the inquiries expert, says about it. Summarising paragraphs 159 to 167, D687 then talks about his involvement with the ACDT process. He describes occasions in which he told staff at Brookhouse about his self-harming or suicidal ideation, but which did not prompt them to put him on ACDT. This included disclosing his suicidal ideation during emotional health group therapy. It also included an incident involving his cellmate, D343, which Callum Tully describes in some unbroadcast footage. He sets out what that footage says, with a particular entry about him being British. D687 also sets out here an exchange with DCM Chris Donnelly. Reading paragraph 168, during the above exchange, I'm obviously emotional and frustrated by everything which has happened to me. At one stage I say, I'm going to go about it differently, because I've had enough, bruv. It's getting boring now, mate. I swear to God, bruv. Look, do you see this? The other day I fucking kicked off. Why did I get this mark? Because of what you lot are doing to us. I'm pointing to my arms when I say this, and I can recall it because I'd recently self-harmed by cutting my arms with razor blades. I was showing them the marks from the self-harm and saying that it was because of the ongoing immigration detention, but none of the officers reacted. The marks I was showing them were those which I gave myself on 13th of April 2017, as mentioned above. Like I said above, the officers didn't care about us. They didn't even care whether we lived or died. I still have the scars on my arms from the cuts I was showing those officers. Summarising 169 to 171, D687 then says some more about the ACDT process. He points out that he was not put on an ACDT at this stage, nor on 27th of April when he saw Vanessa Smith of the Home Office. He sets out her GCID note of that exchange. Reading paragraph 172, my solicitors have referred me to Vanessa Smith's PSU statement, and the reference is there, in which she is asked why she did not open an ACDT. Her response was, I didn't open an ACDT as I managed to calm him down by explaining the procedures of immigration, but informed that managers, to make them aware, the G4S managers spoke to him and didn't feel it was necessary at that time. I do not remember feeling calm after my conversation with Vanessa Smith, as she suggests. I had told her that I had asked for help, but no one wanted to help me, not the nurses, not the officers. I told her that, so I would just die at Brookhouse. I told her it would be the last monthly progress report she would give me, as I'd been dead in the next month. She just told me what their rules are, that I'd be going on a flight once I had a ticket. Her concern was serving the paperwork. She wasn't interested in whether I lived or died, and that came across in her dismissive attitude. She didn't even tell me what I wanted to hear for the sake of encouragement, just what she had been told to tell me. Here's your monthly progress report, lump it. She made me more pissed off, more angry as I was walking out. She made it worse. She said things like, I'm just a messenger being told to pass it on to you. Whatever it is, you'll need to lump it and deal with it. There's nothing I can do. I'm not here to help you. I'm just here to serve you with this, and I'm not your caseworker, so can't help you. But you never see your caseworker, and the person giving you your report can't answer any of your questions. She didn't say anything encouraging about appeals or things changing. She wasn't there to help me. Part of her job was not to give me hope, so I'd give up and sign papers to go somewhere where I'd die. I thought I'd rather die quickly here than being removed and dying slowly in another country I don't know. Summarising paragraphs 173 to 174, D687 then speaks a little more about that and how by that stage everyone had ignored him, so he knew there was no point in trying to ask for help. He'd given up. He then talks about an interaction with officers. He's then reading paragraphs 175 to 176. During that interaction, both officers laugh at me repeatedly for calling myself British. They are laughing in my face as I try to explain why I feel as British as anyone, even though I was born abroad and don't have a passport. For them, despite my efforts to explain them by British identity, it just kept coming back to the fact that I didn't have a British passport and so wasn't British. As I explained above, I should have got a British passport when I was a child, but didn't because I was taken into care by social services who then failed to apply for a passport. The fact that I should have got a British passport and they were laughing at me for not having one, that made it all worse. I told them it wasn't funny, but they continued to laugh. They tried to suggest they were only playing with me like it was a joke. That may be true for them, but the joke was at my expense. Having people laugh in your face and deny your identity when you're in constant fear of being deported because of that same fact, it was humiliating and distressing. It was even more degrading, the way they did it then, said that not what they were doing, like they were gaslighting me. Summarising paragraphs 177 to 182, D687 then talks about Callum having talked to him a little more about his case. D687 refers, as he had to Vanessa Smith, about going out in a body bag. He then refers to a GCID entry on 4th of May 2017, which shows both the Home Office and G4S knew of his presentation at this stage, but an ACDT had not been opened. An ACDT was then opened on 5th of May 2017 because D687 threatened to take an overdose. However, D687 points out that there was no referral for a Rule 35.2 report. Summarising paragraphs 183 to 196, in these paragraphs D687 sets out what he has seen and experienced concerning the use of force in Brookhouse. He says it was regularly excessive and he gives examples. He describes the abusive, racist and sometimes goading language which often accompanied it. D667 talks about another particular incident involving his cellmate D343. He sets out who was involved with that. D687 then talks about the key incident concerning him, which occurred on 13th of May 2017. He describes the lead up to that. Reading 197 to 199. Watching the footage of this incident was incredibly difficult. It brought me to tears again as all the emotions from that day came flooding back to me. It reminded me very clearly that what I was feeling that day wasn't just a single incident of force being used on me, it was all my trauma and experiences since childhood, which had come to the surface whilst detained at Brookhouse, merging with my experiences at Brookhouse. This combination had been getting worse and worse the longer I was in detention, and particularly since my brother's death in 2016. That was the point at which I started to give up hope. I already felt worthless because of how I had been treated at Brookhouse. As my mental health deteriorated, I then started to give up on life to the extent I wanted to die in a toilet on 13th of May 2017. I'd already told G4S Home Office and healthcare staff that this is how I felt and that I wanted to die. On 25th of April 2017, only 3 weeks earlier, I had shown officers my arms where I'd self-harmed and told them I couldn't take it anymore. There's a reference there. I said if there was any attempt to remove me to another country, centre or wherever, I would take my own life and end up in the body bag. The fact that the events of 13th of May occurred show that either that I wasn't taken seriously or that they didn't care if I died, probably both. The main reasons why I hadn't tried to kill myself before 13th of May 2017 was that I just hadn't had the opportunity to do it yet. Unlike my prison cell in HMP Wormwood Scrubs, there were no points in my cell in Brookhouse, which I could hang myself from. I could have cut my wrists, but I didn't want my cellmate to find me like that. We were friends. I could have done it in the showers, either hanged or cut myself, but again I didn't want to be found by other detained people. I didn't want to leave them with that image of me in their head. I know what it's like to see some really bad things and keep reliving them, even years later. I didn't want to be the cause of that for someone else. But on 13th of May 2017, an opportunity came up, and I tried to take it. Summarising paragraphs 200 to 217, D687 then provides more detail about the event. He describes the long wait and how it made things worse, his feelings of worthlessness, fear, and being pushed over the edge. He speaks of how he regrets the amateur mistake of not having realised it was a disabled toilet, which is why he didn't lock it properly. He says he said his prayers, but then an officer came in. D687 then switches to commenting on some of what he is recorded as saying on Mr. Tully's video footage. D687 mentions the comment heard on the video from DCM Donnelly. Then we'll wait for a minute until you pass out and then we'll cut you down. He says he remembers that and that it added to my feeling of worthlessness. D687 then talks about the trick with the lighter from duty director Dan Horton, followed by him being grabbed and being taken to the floor. He describes being in pain and struggling to breathe with the officer's weight on top of him, his face and chest compressed against the toilet floor. He says he felt the incident was prolonged, he had been handcuffed and was calm, yet he felt officers hurting his arm and a thump to his ribs. He thinks this was done to cause him pain. He says it was this pain which is why he was shouting what he can be heard to be shouting. D687 then talks about the aftermath, being taken to reception, being examined by nurses while still handcuffed and surrounded by officers. He says neither of the nurses seemed to have much interest in me, although he also says that he thinks he told them to go away and that the pain in his ribs had not fully kicked in yet, probably because he was still full of adrenaline. D687 then describes being taken to the Verne, talks about receiving better and more sympathetic care there, although he still had problems. D687 was eventually released from the Verne on the 29th of November 2017. Summarising paragraphs 218 to 226, D687 then talks about the impact his detention at Brookhouse has had on him. He also speaks about what he hopes to get from his participation in this inquiry. He speaks a little about what has happened to him since and his ongoing struggles with his mental health, which on one occasion resulted in him being rearrested and then detained, first on remand but then under immigration powers. He describes having to bring a judicial review shortly before the inquiry's Phase 1 hearings to secure his release from that. Reading paragraph 218, I'll never forget the experiences I had at Brookhouse. They will stay with me for the rest of my life. I was treated like an animal, something less than human. It's left an impact on me and my mental health which I don't think I'll ever get over. When I entered Brookhouse, I felt relatively normal. When I left it, I felt broken, hopeless, and mad. Staff set out to make me feel worthless. They succeeded. I still feel worthless a lot of the time. I often feel like I have nothing to live for, but Brookhouse didn't just affect me, it affected my family and has strained the relationships I have with them. Now reading paragraphs 224 to 226. As I've explained above, I've now been diagnosed with recurrent depressive disorder and PTSD. I'm also suspected as having developed bipolar affective disorder. I live with this every day, I take medication and it helps, but I still have good days and bad days. I think that's the nature of my mental illness. On the bad days, I think about ending my life, but on the good days, I'm hopeful that maybe my life will take an upward turn this year. I have been referred to the community mental health team, but I'm still waiting on an assessment. In the meantime, I have recently started speaking with a psychologist weekly. That was arranged by Hestia, and I'm really grateful to them for all the support they've given me during this inquiry process. I don't want these things to happen to others. Lessons should be learnt. Detained persons should be treated with dignity and respect. I also want to say this. Following my release and following the Panorama documentary airing in September 2017, I took part in the PSU's investigation. It was a pointless and insulting exercise which felt like a cover-up. I also brought a judicial review claim challenging the Home Secretary's attempts not to hold this public inquiry into the abuse and mistreatment of me and other detained people. It seemed like the Home Office made every effort they could to delay the process, to make it more difficult for it to work or for people to remember things. However, I have been pleased to see the progress the inquiry has made over the last year, and especially at the hearings in November and December 2021. I'm now hopeful that the inquiry can hold those who perpetrated wrongdoing accountable and get to the bottom of the systemic problems which affected Brookhouse, but also many other immigration detention centres. My hope is that lessons can be learned, they must be, to prevent anything like this happening to anyone else. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. And thank you. I would like to just acknowledge that I know D687 has taken the time to come and to hear that evidence today, and I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.
Chair.
Miss Liu, I think we're now hearing from you again on behalf of your client D1275.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you.
Apologise. Yes, Chair. I have two witness statements to read on D1275's behalf. The first statement is that of Hamish Arnold, and that is at BHM 00042. I hope I've read the reference right. And there's a reading in summary. Introduction. I am a solicitor and work as a consultant at Bat Murphy Solicitors. I represent D1275, and I previously represented him in judicial review proceedings commenced in 2018, which involved challenges to his unlawful detention and treatment at Brookhouse during 2017. D127 came to be recognised as a core participant following the emergence of the BBC Panorama footage showing serious incidents of abusive behaviour relating to him. He doesn't feel able to provide direct evidence to the inquiry. He finds it very distressing and difficult to revisit his time in detention. In the circumstances, he has asked that I, as a solicitor, give evidence on his behalf and place his treatment at Brookhouse in the context by reference to, firstly, the information and material that was revealed in the judicial review proceedings, culminating in his release. Secondly, my own experiences of representing him. And thirdly, the documents that have been disclosed in the course of this inquiry. About D1275. D1275 is an Iranian national who arrived in the UK in late 2012. His initial asylum claim was unsuccessful. He served a short criminal sentence from August to December 2015. Whilst in prison, he presented with hallucinations and bizarre behaviour, which the Home Office was made aware of. They detained him anyway, under immigration powers, at the end of his custodial sentence. First detention, 1st of December 2015 to 15th of July 2016. D1275's first detention during this period, he presented with severe mental health issues. His mental health was not assessed or treated. Instead, he spent time in segregation. He was released after the Iranian consulate refused to document him. It was accepted by the Home Office that in the circumstances there was no prospect of his being removed. He was relieved to no fixed abode and was arrested and remanded to prison. Second detention. D1275's second detention was from the 20th of October 2016 to the 25th of June 2018. He continued to present with mental health issues. Whilst at Moreton Hall, Harmondsworth and Collinbrook IRC, segregation was used extensively to manage his mental health. Brookhouse. On 1st of May 2017, D1275 was transferred to Brookhouse IRC, CJS 001148. The reception report is at CJS 001008. The following is a summary of paragraphs 22, 26, 30 to 34, and 36 to 37. The Home Office continued to maintain that there was no prospect of removing D1275 and that his release referral needed to be escalated. The Home Office confirmed this again in late 2017 September, HOM 007802, after the Iranian authorities again confirmed, following interview, that they could not document him. D1275 was recorded as being difficult to understand, gave bizarre responses to questions by the consul, and appeared to lose concentration during the interview. HOM 011253_0002. The Home Office noted that a clear plan was required to manage his risk in the community. He was at this point considered to be an adult at risk level 2. On 14th of June 2017, D1275 was filmed by Callum Tully after having been suspected of taking spice. The inquiry has already admitted the footage of this incident into evidence. Ken Cove 1035, V20170614000015, and V20170614000016. It shows D1275 in a state of extreme physical distress on the ground, with officers seeming unprepared in response to what may well have been a life-threatening situation. Officers and other detainees look on whilst D1275 is on the floor experiencing what appears to be a severe physical reaction to spice. The footage also records some IRC staff verbally abusing D1275 and showing a complete disdain and lack of concern for his well-being and dignity. This includes being mocked by detention custody staff Nathan Ring and Derek Murphy, and humiliating remarks such as, "Keep still, you div, scrotum," and the one highlighted to the inquiry as particularly chilling from Derek Murphy, saying absolutely no sympathy for them all. If he dies, he dies. This contempt for D1275 went unchallenged by others present, including healthcare staff responsible for his care, and despite his serious medical condition and his extreme vulnerability. A nurse was recorded as stating that his pulse was extremely high and he was tachycardic. The medical record entry for 14th of June 2017 contained a very bare description of the incident and did not bear any resemblance to what was seen on the footage. Instead, the medical record stated that D1275 was being rude to staff and swearing. The true nature of the 14th of June 2017 incident only became known through the footage disclosed to the inquiry. On 17th of July 2017, D1275 was placed in segregation under Rule 40 for apparently fighting with another detained person. The record for this states that he was, quote, not making sense, unquote. CJS 001004_0004. A G4S incident log dated 8th of August 2017 noted D1275 was verbally abusive to an officer, CJS 000478. There were other log entries recording similar incidents, but there was no consideration of D1275's behavior by reference to concerns raised by detention staff about his mental health. My contact with D1275. The following is a summary of paragraphs 38 to 42. Mr. Arnold was first contacted by D1275 by Naomi Blackwell, then an advocate for Gatwick Detainee Welfare Group, in November 2017. D1275 had been at Brookhouse for 6 months by then. Ms. Blackwell was concerned D1275 may lack mental capacity to make decisions about his immigration case because he behaved very oddly, spoke in tangents, seemed paranoid and mistrustful. Ms. Blackwell also made a referral on behalf of D1275 to the Safe for Custody inbox, raising her concerns about his mental health. CJS 001054_0006. D1275's medical records obtained by Ms. Blackwell showed that there had been concerns about his mental health at various times during his detention. For example, on admission to Brookhouse, he was already identified as having mental health issues, hearing voices. The nurse also recorded that he said, quote, "They will find me," but wouldn't elaborate on who he was. CJS 001121_0106. D1275's medical records showed he repeatedly missed mental health appointments, a total of 13 times, and therefore was discharged from the mental health team caseload. There were no inquiries into why he may have missed the appointments on so many occasions or whether this was symptomatic of underlying mental health or capacity issues. This is even though a security information report had been raised by a detention centre wing officer on the 22nd of June 2017, CJS 005347_0001, noting that D1275 may not have capacity to understand appointments with doctors and attend them. Observation records disclosed to the inquiry noted that on the 16th of December 2017, his, quote, behaviour has become strange. He has flooded the ground floor with water, then started mopping, was also talking to himself, close quotes. CJS 005986_001. I visited D1275 with Miss Blackwell on the 19th of December 2017. I was very concerned over his presentation. He spent much of the appointment with me talking in a very disorganized way, involving non sequiturs and raising irrelevancies and without any focus to the conversation. The following is a summary of paragraphs 47, 51 to 55. After the meeting, Mr. Arnold obtained documents relating to D1275 and instructed a psychiatrist, Dr. Raghunathan, to assess him. Meanwhile, in February 2018, the Home Office arranged for D1275 to be interviewed by the Iranian consul again. The Iranian consul continued to refuse to document D1275. The consul raised concerns about his welfare as he did not appear to understand answers or questions. The Home Office made no progress on release after this interview, even though there remained no prospect of removal. There was also no progress in identifying suitable bail accommodation for D1275. Therefore, he remained in detention. Report of Dr. Raghunathan. Dr. Raghunathan produced a report on 9th of March 2018. Its key points are as follows. D1275 was suffering from a mental disorder, most likely a mood disorder such as bipolar affective disorder, with psychotic symptoms or psychotic illness with mood abnormalities. The observations of D1275's bizarre and thought-disorientated presentation recorded in the medical notes supported this diagnosis. The presentation of symptoms of hallucination meant a diagnosis of psychotic illness could not be ruled out. D1275 did not have capacity to instruct a lawyer to take steps on his behalf to secure his release or to resolve his immigration status. He did not have capacity to consent to medical treatment, as he did not have any insight into his mental disorder. Dr. Raghunathan expressed a strong view that immigration detention was, quote, perpetuating his mental disorder, close quote, and that, quote, he is not able to receive the appropriate care and support for his mental disorder whilst he remains at the immigration detention centre, close quotes. Whilst Dr. Raghunathan did not consider D1275's mental disorder to be severe enough at the time to require hospital transfer for urgent treatment under the Mental Health Act, he was of the view that D1275 did require, quote, a comprehensive psychiatric assessment with the support of a Farsi-speaking interpreter to gain a better understanding of the nature and severity of the mental disorder, close quotes. Dr. Raghunathan stated that D1275 needed a comprehensive support package and involvement of the local mental health team if he was released into the community in order to keep him safe and others safe. In the light of Dr. Raghunathan's report on D1275's mental capacity, the official solicitor agreed to act as his litigation friend. The report was provided to the Home Office with a pre-action letter on the 22nd of March 2018 to challenge the lawfulness of D1275's detention. The letter pointed out that D1275 was an adult at risk level 3 and his mental health was being harmed by continued detention. It also stated that the Home Office's treatment of D1275 included the absence of mental health input and the use of desegregation was discriminatory on account of his disabilities. Dr. Raghunathan's report was also sent to Brookhouse Healthcare Department with a request for a Rule 35(1) report and a psychiatric assessment. Neither the Home Office or Brookhouse's Healthcare Department responded. On the 29th of March 2018, D1275 was seen by a psychiatrist, Dr. Belder, for the first time in Brookhouse. He observed that D1275 presented as confused and giving irrelevant information in answers to questions. Dr. Belder expressed the view that it was difficult to give a diagnosis based on one appointment, but observed that D1275 presents as vulnerable and recommended a full capacity assessment to be undertaken in the light of Dr. Raghunathan's report. On the 10th of April 2018, an ongoing observations log noted that D1275 seemed depressed and low, CJS 001052. The following is a summary of paragraphs 71 to 73 and 75. On the 12th of April 2018, D1275 was seen by another Brookhouse psychiatrist, Dr. Mark Harrison, for a mental capacity assessment, but only in respect of his capacity to instruct a solicitor. The assessment concluded that he had capacity, but did not address the requisite statutory considerations under the Mental Capacity Act 2005. He diagnosed D1275 as having possible intellectual impairment. No consideration was given to his capacity to make decisions about his medical treatment or his ability to make representations on his own behalf about his detention. A learning disability test carried out on the 11th of May 2018 indicated that D1275 had a learning disability. Further medical records in April and May 2018 described D1275 as muddled, confused, and incoherent. D1275's judicial review. The following is a summary of paragraphs 81 to 91. On the 18th of May 2018, judicial review proceedings were issued to challenge D1275's ongoing detention. The court ordered the Home Office to provide an expedited response to the claim and whether and when D1275 would be released. On the 25th of June 2018, the Home Office released D1275 from immigration detention to asylum support accommodation in Bolton. He was observed to continue to display bizarre behaviour by the accommodation provider. Detention under the Mental Health Act. On the 17th of August 2018, D1275 was sectioned for treatment under the Section 3 of the Mental Health Act at Broad Green Hospital. He remained there until 7th of December 2018, when he was discharged subject to a community treatment order. The following is a summary of paragraphs 97 to 109, 111, and 113. D1275's mental health improved in hospital, but he continued to lack mental capacity to instruct solicitors. Meanwhile, the Home Office contested the claim, denied D1275 was mentally ill or lacked mental capacity during his time at Brookhouse. The Home Office only conceded the unlawful detention claim shortly before a full hearing in December 2019. This settlement was reached without disclosure from the Home Office related to his serious mistreatment whilst at Brookhouse. He could not give his own account of his mistreatment to his lawyers because he was extremely unwell and mentally incapacitated. More than 1,000 pages were subsequently disclosed by the Home Office to the inquiry about D1275's treatment in Brookhouse. It is only with this disclosure that it has come to light that there had been serious concerns about his vulnerability, the fact that he was not legally represented, the fact that he might lack capacity to make key decisions affecting his detention, but nothing was done to assist him. Incident of the 14th of June 2017. At the time when D1275 was filmed by Callum Tully on the 14th of June 2017, suffering a spice attack, he should not have been detained at all. The Home Office had already by that time decided that there were no prospects of his being removed and that he should be released. But the Home Office's inaction meant he was in immigration detention on that day. After that incident, on the 20th of June 2017, DCO Andy Jennings raised a Security Intelligence Report, CJS 004642. The supporting evidence box on this noted, quote, mental health issues, erratic and strange behaviour. Wing staff reported concerns yesterday regarding his associations and believed he may be easily led and vulnerable. RMN requested to add him back on their list. The security manager's comments were that an RMN referral had been made. He would be monitored and there would be a referral to safer community. It is unclear what happened with this referral. On the 22nd of June 2017, some 8 days after the incident filmed by Callum Tully, DCO Marina Manzi raised a Security Intelligence Report, CJS 005347. This led to the creation of an anti-bullying plan. This stated that she was concerned that D1275 was, quote, not in a positive mental state. D1275 was used as a guinea pig to try out the drugs that are trafficked in. He has been socializing with detainees that are known drug users and dealers. He has been cleaning tables even though he is not a cleaner, and his roommate has seen cleaners get him to do this so they get paid but don't have to do the work. And they give him biscuits and other things. The officers have seen detainees take his plate and cutlery from him in the mail queue, and he doesn't say anything about that. He has also been seen being used as a messenger for detainees not residing on the wing who treated him in an abusive manner, and has been seen to clutch him round the neck, forcing him to go back with messages. He was seen by an officer being asked to get a phone from someone and was then seen demanding the phone as requested. The officer doesn't feel he is aware of some of his decisions and has been taken advantage of. The intelligence assessment on the Sir stated, quote, "It appears other officers have witnessed him being mistreated but have not reported it." An email regarding the Sir sent by Kelly Harris to James Begg at 15:57 on the 22nd of June 2017 states that, quote, "The officer has been asked to open an ABS, but it appears that this has been ongoing for some, unreported. CJS 004642_0007. An anti-bullying support plan was opened, CJS 001127. D1275 attended the initial meeting with a friend, D2553, who interpreted for him. The record of that meeting is as follows. A lot of D1275's answers made no sense to what I was asking him. I don't believe he grasped what I'm saying. D2553 is also concerned because he tries to sort out appointments for him with solicitors and doctors, but it appears D1275 doesn't have mental capacity to know when his appointments are and to attend them. Have informed him that we are opening an anti-bullying log, which means that we will be keeping an eye on him. If he needs to talk to any of us, just come to see us about any concerns. In the section of the document designed to set out the support plan, there's only one entry. The objective action is for DCM Yates to look into the reasons why he's being detained. The reason given for this is possibly not fit for detention. The document includes sections that are to be used for reviews of the anti-bullying plan, although none of these are completed, and it's unclear whether there were any reviews, the reasons for closing the support plan, or what became of DCM Yates' investigations. The document does include a section for observations. These run from the 22nd of June to the 25th of June 2017. These do not make clear why the plan was stopped. There are a number of entries that raise concerns that a DCM was meant to review the plan. The last one on the 24th of June 2017 states, quote, DCM Dix to implement investigation and inform staff of observations, close quote. CJS 001127_0008. There is no record of the outcome of any investigation. The first page of the support plan notes that the first review of the plan should have been on the 29th of June 2017. However, it appears that there was no such review, as the plan seems to have been stopped when the observations ceased on the 25th of June 2017. This is despite the fact that the second page of the document states that, quote, a document must be open for at least 14 days before it can be closed. This is to allow sufficient time for the individual to be supported and monitored, close quote. This is important as this anti-bullying document was created at a time when the Home Office recognised that D1275 could not be removed within a reasonable period of time. It raises further grounds upon which he should not have been detained at this time due to his vulnerability and possible lack of capacity to make decisions regarding steps that might assist him in his release. It appears this was a lost opportunity to ensure that D1275 would not be further detained unlawfully. The inquiry has disclosed a transcript of footage from 3rd of July 2017, Can Cove 1039, V2017 0703 000007-2. That appears to show D1275 stumbling around the wing under the influence of drugs. This took place at a time when D1275 was already recognized to be vulnerable and being exploited as a guinea pig. There's no record of what the detention staff or the Home Office did in response. A further missed opportunity was around the time the Panorama program was shown. A supported living plan was opened on the 4th of September 2017 and closed on 15th of September 2017. CJS 001036_0001. The following is a summary of paragraphs 128 to 134. The supported living plan noted learning disabilities and safeguarding on the first page. The SLP stated that D1275 had not been identified as an adult at risk, which conflicted with what the detention review said. The SLP was not directed at safeguarding D1275's vulnerabilities, but due to allegations made by BBC Panorama relating to his treatment. The SLP did note that the RMN should remind D1275 of appointments. This was completed by Karen Churcher, an IRC nurse, but as has already been stated earlier, D1275 was discharged by the mental health caseload for non-attendance. As with the anti-bullying plan opened in June, because D1275 was not actively stating that he needed help, safeguarding steps stopped, and no other steps were apparently taken to properly assess his capacity and put in place reasonable adjustments to ensure that his detention was properly reviewed and brought to an end. Owen Syred's second witness statement. The following is a summary of paragraphs 138 to 139. The inquiry heard evidence in Phase 1 from Owen Syred, who stated in his second witness statement, INN 000010_0005, that he believes he was aware of D1275's case and gave evidence that D1275 was transferred from Tinsley House shortly after the incident on the 14th of June 2017. This is factually incorrect. D1275 remained at Brookhouse until 25th of June 2018. Mr. Syred also said he suggested to a DCO called Mo to raise a SIR about the incident. This is also not correct. The SIRs raised about D1275 were on 20th and 22nd of June 2017 by other DCOs, Andy Jennings and Marina Manzi. Mr. Syred's evidence about D1275 is not factually correct and should be disregarded. The case of VC. My involvement with D1275 was not the first time that I had represented someone who lacked capacity to instruct solicitors at Brookhouse. I represented HA, 2012 EWHC 979 admin, whose treatment in 2010, after his mental health has seriously deteriorated in Brookhouse, was found by the court to have been in breach of Article 3 ECHR. The inquiry is also aware of the case of VC, as there has been evidence of the fact that Ms. Blackwell had provided a statement in VC's case in 2015, and that this had caused difficulties between GDWG and the management of Brookhouse. The following is a summary of paragraphs 141 to 158. The VC case, which concerned detention at Brookhouse in 2015 in breach of Article 3, highlighted many of the issues that affected D1275 during his detention at Brookhouse. In the VC case, the Court of Appeal found that there were no processes at Brookhouse or across the detention estate to ensure that those who lack mental capacity were facilitated to participate in decisions relating to their detention and removal from association under Rule 40. This lacuna persisted whilst D1275 was detained and therefore affected him as well. Conclusion. The detention of D1275 at Brookhouse covered both the pre- and post-panorama periods between 2016 to 2018 and highlights long-standing concerns that were also evident from the detention of VC at Brookhouse in 2015. The failure of the adults at risk detention policy and safeguards to identify D1275's extreme vulnerability, deteriorating mental health illness, and lack of or compromised mental capacity exposed him into an experience marked by reckless indifference for his safety, neglect of his mental and physical health, as well as conditions that left him subjected to bullying, exploitation, further humiliation, and abuse. Whilst individual officers like Nathan Ring and Derek Murphy must be held responsible for their reprehensible conduct, other officers and healthcare staff offered no challenge to this, and many more were aware of D1275's acute vulnerabilities, but took no effective action to protect him. His case is therefore an example of the system's failure, an institutional culture within the immigration detention system that allowed this abuse of D1275 to go on for so long, 615 days in total, 422 at Brookhouse, including 295 after Panorama had been broadcast. In assessing what caused or contributed to the mistreatment, abuse, and humiliation of D1275, the inquiry is asked to consider the following. First, D1275 had a severe and untreated mental health issues which were not properly identified or managed at Brookhouse. No Rule 35 report was ever produced at the IRC during his whole detention there. Second, allied with this was a failure to undertake any assessment of D1275's mental capacity, despite notes that he appeared not to understand questions asked of him or appointments with doctors, their purpose, their relevance, and their importance. This failure to deal sensitively and effectively with detained persons who might lack capacity and to ensure that they have an ability to access legal remedies in respect of their detention and their treatment in detention was not new to Brookhouse in 2017. See the case of VC, where the absence of any measures to support them was held to be unlawful and discriminatory, contrary to the Equality Act 2010. Yet even after the Court of Appeal directed the Home Secretary to take urgent steps to remedy the serious systemic lacuna, this did not happen. D1275 was detained for a further 4 months after the judgment in VC, with no action being taken to remedy the deficits in the law and practice. Indeed, he was discharged from healthcare and safeguarding protection precisely because he was unable to himself proactively participate in his own care. By the time D1275's substantive judicial review hearing in December 2019, the lacuna still existed. Almost 4 years after the VC judgment, there still is no effective measure to address the specific vulnerable position of mentally incapacitated detainees in immigration detention. Vulnerability and powerlessness to object are recurrent features in which Article 3 breaches can and have occurred at Brookhouse. In each case, severe mental illness deteriorated over time and went untreated to the point that the men lacked capacity and were subjected to inhumane and degrading treatment, and the cases are cited in the witness statement. Counsel for the inquiry noted in opening that for those detained persons who were vulnerable, the prevalence of drugs and the levels of intoxication created a frightening and unpredictable environment in which their general welfare would undoubtedly have been suffered. In D1275's case, he was bullied, exploited, and apparently used as a guinea pig for drugs. All of this happened with the knowledge and acquiescence of detention centre staff, despite it being their statutory duty under Rule 45(2) to promptly report any abuse or impropriety in their knowledge. Worse still, this was set against Home Office decision-making, which was characterised by a disregard of the clear and credible clinical indicators of D1275's vulnerabilities and the maintenance of prolonged detention where it was known that there was just no prospect of achieving removal. The Home Office refused to address that reality and continued to make attempts for D1275 to be interviewed by the Iranian consulate officials on 5 occasions, even after the officials themselves raised concerns about his bizarre behaviour. To date, there has been no real accountability within the Home Office for these unlawful actions, whether at a systems or an individual level. The challenge to the lawfulness of D1275's detention was settled for a very substantial sum of money, but with the most minimal concession on when the detention became unlawful and why. No apology has been offered. The concessions were, in my view, tactical to avoid the full proceedings and scrutiny of the court. Only this inquiry is uncovering the true extent of the failure of the safeguards and the gravity of the consequences for D1275's fundamental rights, physical and mental health, his moral integrity, and his human dignity. Mr. Arnold has provided a statement of truth to this effect.
I'm aware that you also have a second. Yes. Could you give sort of an approximation of how long you think that's likely to be? I'm just wondering if you take a quick 10-minute comfort break.
I was told to cap it at 15 minutes.
Okay, that's fine. Can I suggest that we continue then, if it genuinely is going to be 15 minutes?
I've timed it, so
okay.
hopefully
I shall trust
that
you.
would work.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So the next statement on behalf of D1275 is that of Miss Naomi Blackwell, and it's BHM 000040. Introduction. I am currently employed as the Detention Outreach Manager for Jesuit Refugee Service UK. My work at GDWG. Between July 2013 and November 2018, I was employed as an advocacy coordinator with GDWG, where I worked on a part-time basis. The inquiry has already heard evidence from the current and former directors of GDWG and is familiar with its work at Brookhouse. I have been requested to prepare this statement in relation to my contact with and on behalf of D1275. I vividly recall my dealings with him, as his circumstances represent a particularly clear example of the failure of the system at Brookhouse in respect of safeguards for vulnerable individuals. I often became aware of other individuals in the IRC whose extreme vulnerabilities made them unsuitable to be held in the detention environment. Some of those individuals drawn to my attention by other detained persons lacked or appeared to lack mental capacity to make decisions about their welfare, treatment, and detention as a result of their mental health. They were therefore hard to reach, as they would not necessarily know how to seek help or recognize that they need help. My contact with D1275. Ms. Blackwell was alerted to D1275 in October 2017 when told by another detained person about, quote, a crazy man, unquote, on his wing, who walked around wearing half a football on his head and a mask over his eyes. By this time, the BBC Panorama programme on Brookhouse had aired. However, at the time, I did not know that the programme footage had captured mistreatment suffered by D1275. I only subsequently became aware of that when I was informed by his solicitor, Mr. Arnold, in 2021. I had hoped to make contact with D1275 via the GDWG drop-in sessions and try to arrange for his attendance. The term drop-in is a misnomer, as it was not the case that detained people could freely come in and see us. GDWG needed to provide G4S officers with a list of names. The detainee names are called using a tannoy system. Sometimes GDWG would ask for assistance from individual officers to locate detained persons. D1275 failed to respond to these initial approaches. It was only on the 2nd of November when I was finally able to arrange for his cellmate to accompany him to a drop-in the following day, 3rd of November 2017. The following are the notes that appear within the records of GDWG relating to that initial visit. Quote, gave every indication that he does not have capacity to make decisions about his immigration case. Adamant he wants to return to Iran, but unclear what would await him on arrival, and even if he could return. Did not appear floridly psychotic or angry. He was, however, paranoid, distrustful, talked a lot, tangentially, unable to complete sentences or follow trains of thought, smiles a lot, almost eager to please. Maybe this is why he has not found himself on E-Wing. He believes someone called Vical will find him a solicitor if he needs one. He doesn't know if he does. He would not give me Vical's number or tell me who he was. Stroked the table a lot, dragging his palms across it, studied the table at very close range, with his head almost touching it at one point. Unaware he was detained, unaware he was in England. I asked him how long he had been in England, and he seemed surprised he was there. He spoke of how he needed phone credit and how the credit ran out quickly. His cellmate pointed out he appears to be using his phone a lot, but it does not contain a SIM, and he seems unaware of this. I advised I wanted to arrange a visitor to see him regularly, but he said he has numerous people visiting him. His cellmate said that he believes D1275 has received no visits in Brookhouse. He said he arrived in 2012. He said he was in Liverpool for 2 years and he had young girlfriends, that he was sorry and he hoped he would be forgiven. The cellmate thinks he has been in Brookhouse for 2 months. I asked the cellmate to send me any Home Office papers he had, but I have received nothing as yet. I requested them today, 6th of November. I obtained D1275's form of authority at this appointment. After this meeting, Ms. Blackwell submitted a request for the release of D1275's medical records to her. This was received on the 13th of November 2017. Due to my significant concerns about his capacity, on 6th of November, I referred him to Hamish Arnold of Bat-Murphy Solicitors. In the middle of November 2017, in accordance with the practices of GDWG, I also made arrangements for him to be seen by a volunteer social visitor. Unfortunately, D1275 did not attend the meetings arranged. Non-attendance at appointments, social or medical, was always high for people who had specific mental health vulnerabilities, and the system and unsympathetic attitude shown by a range of staff within Brookhouse towards these men served to exclude them further. On the 17th of November 2017, I emailed Safer Community, a G4S email, that we had received reports from other detained persons raising concerns about D1275. I gave the following examples, quote, bizarre behavior, staring into space, inappropriate laughter, tangential speech, close quotes. I requested confirmation of receipt, but received no response. On the 19th of December 2017, I attended an appointment with D1275, along with the solicitor, Mr. Arnold. D1275's presentation remained the same as when I first met him in November. He appeared to me to be making genuine attempts to communicate, but he was incoherent and struggled to formulate answers to Mr. Arnold's questions. Once Bat Murphy had been instructed, I continued to try and support and assist D1275 to try and ensure that his welfare was adequately considered. However, it was hard to keep track of his presentation over time because he did not engage with our social visitor. I managed to see D1275 again on the 22nd of December 2017, when he was initially uncooperative and asked if I was a police officer. Unfortunately, he was also unable to produce his Home Office reference number. Notwithstanding the fact that I had his written authority, his correct name and date of birth, G4S refused to provide his Home Office reference when I requested it on the 22nd of December. This prevented me from making a subject access request to the Home Office to obtain his immigration documents. On the 27th of December, I submitted an I submitted an application for bail accommodation for his release on his behalf. On the 2nd of May 2018, I attempted to see D1275, but was informed by officers that he was shaving and, quote, in a funny mood, unquote. My next substantive meeting with D1275 alone occurred on the 14th of May 2018. My notes confirmed that he was still seriously unwell. Quote, he started by speaking in Farsi and kept saying he had to leave, but he finally calmed down and we spoke for a while. He presented in exactly the same way as he has done on all previous occasions, smiling and chuckling inappropriately, playing with his fingers and the table, holding intense eye contact, failing to respond to any questions with a direct answer, and he still really struggles to formulate any coherent thought or sentence, close quote. On 20th of June 2018, I attended an appointment with D1275 with Mr. Arnold. At this meeting, he did not recognize Mr. Arnold and did not appear to understand his role. Throughout the interview, he was spitting into a little cup he had brought with him into the room. He said he was confused. On the 26th of June 2018, D1275 had been released from detention at 17:55 without any apparent support or arrangements being made to ensure that his obvious care needs would be properly catered for and that he would not subsequently pose a risk to himself or to other members of the public. No notice was given to Mr. Arnold in advance of D1275's release, even though there were ongoing judicial review proceedings, and that claim was seeking D1275's safe release. A series of telephone calls were made between ourselves and Bolton Police. I raised my concerns detailing his mental health condition and extreme vulnerability. I gave them his address and a description of his physical appearance. They agreed they would do a welfare check on that day at the property and let us know the results. The following day, 27th of June 2018, we received a call from Bolton Police retracting the offer to make a welfare check. The sergeant's file note was read out to me as follows, quote, Home Office put them somewhere that has been risk assessed by the Home Office and confirmed that is suitable. NFA will be carried out and we don't need to attend. If they have released him, then he must have some capacity, close quotes. On the 2nd of July 2018, I again made contact with the accommodation provider and was informed that D1275 had arrived at the property address. The property manager advised me that D1275 had displayed odd behavior. He had repeatedly asked the manager if he would be returning to the property later and had also made sexual advances to him. The manager had said he was extremely reluctant to have any further contact with D1275. The manager believed that D1275 should not be accommodated there. I later heard from Mr. Arnold that he had been arrested on the 22nd of July 2018 and then transferred to hospital under Section 2 of the Mental Health Act for urgent assessment. He was then detained under Section 3 of the Mental Health Act for treatment. My contact with VC. Prior to working with Mr. Arnold on D1275's case, I had referred another case to Mr. Arnold, that of a man, VC, whose health deteriorated to such an extent that he also lacked mental capacity. He also lost mental capacity whilst in immigration detention. VC had contacted GDWG initially on 31st of December 2014, requesting assistance, and from the outset, it was clear he would require a psychiatric assessment and a referral to public law solicitors. The following is a summary of paragraphs 43, 44, and 46. When Bat Murphy issued judicial review proceedings for VC, with the official solicitor acting as this litigation friend, Ms. Blackwell provided a witness statement for the claim to explain her contact with VC and her observations of his rapid decline in his mental health whilst in detention. The inquiry has already heard evidence in the first phase about the considerable backlash that GDWG suffered from the Home Office and G4S as a result of her involvement in the judicial review. Without a doubt, the constant pressure of criticism of our support for detained men, particularly those with severe vulnerabilities like D1275 and VC, had a chilling effect and impacted on our ability to work freely. I recall Nick Eady asking me to be very cautious how I worded any correspondence with the Home Office, should they take offence at any perceived criticisms of their practices. The fear was that our ability to access Brookhouse would be withdrawn, and that would not be in the interest of all the other detained people who needed our help. Summary of paragraphs 49, 55 to 59. Ms. Blackwell says that D1275 and VC were not two isolated cases. Ms. Blackwell goes on in her statement to mention other cases which she says highlight the pattern of breaches of duties to those with mental illness and therefore a disability under the Equality Act 2010. My experience bears out the findings in the Court of Appeal, both in VC in 2018 and MDA in 2019, that the Home Office continues to fail to provide the measures and safeguards necessary to meet the particular needs of those with serious mental illness whose capacity may be compromised in detention. The primary deficit identified by the court and supported by the Equality and Human Rights Commission of a lack of provision of independent mental health advocates or their equivalent has not been introduced, and I consider there remains ongoing breaches of these important duties. The consequence of the absence of this provision is that extremely unwell people like D1275 and VC could have remained detained without the ability to seek assistance in respect of their detention and treatment. It should not be dependent on small charities and individual advocates to take steps to assist them to access support. The responsibility has to be with the Home Office and its contractors to operate a system that is capable of protecting these vulnerable detainees. Ms. Blackwell has provided a signed statement of truth.
Thank you, Ms. Lee.
Chair, that concludes the evidence for today.
Thank you. I'd just like to say thank you again to all three individuals who we've heard evidence from. So that's D801, D687, D1275. With that, is us finished for the day then, I believe. So we will reconvene tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Thank you. All right. Thank you.
Perfect timing.
I did like read it 3 times last night.
Oh, we really appreciate it. Thank you. I saw it better.